£350,000. Of course, if you are the owner of Spey, one of the first things you'll get, or perhaps by plane, and in the future you'll be able to. We've had an airstrip here on the island for 25 years or so. It was only ever really suitable for pleasure craft, but within the last 2 years the council have purchased land on either end of the airstrip with a view to extend. See those pleasure craft, some of which have glass bottoms so that when you go out on them you can actually see what's happening under the water. And behind the pier, nestling in the trees, is the island's main hospital, Broadford Hospital. Just one hospital does for the whole of the island. The bay here is really quite shallow, and between us and Spey, Alfred River, which actually enters the sea here on the right, we're going to cross it on the bridge, but the bridge replaced the original Broad Ford, which is on the left. And Broadford is a direct translation of the Gaelic Antien Lahan, which actually means the Broad Ford. These trees on the right here are about as big as they get before they're harvested, incidentally. It takes about 30 years to grow a forest from a sapling that big. And when it's time to harvest them, as here on the left, generally speaking, the ground is back under forestry within 2 years. Skye is in fact a lot closer to the Isle of Skye than you think, and as the tide starts to go out, this protected water here is actually an arm of the sea. And as you can see in the distance on the right hand side there, it's relatively safe water. You actually see the old road that the villages were stretched out on. But as work salting the catch became available, houses were actually rebuilt at the seashore to take advantage of this work. And as you'll see, the very first thing you'll see in the mouth of the loch, as so frequently you see here in the Western Highlands, is a salmon farm. And when salmon farming first started here on the Isle of Skye in the early 1970s, salmon farming was viewed as very important because it gave a great deal of employment. Nowadays, commercial pressures have meant that there's less and less employment in salmon. Gone by, it used to take 2 men 365 days a year to feed all the salmon. So that's what they're out to save. But this pinkishness gives the range its name, the Red Coulee. Road built to try to solve the problem of this high pass. The second road was built in the 1920s, and it actually sold 100 horses under Paul's boot. In those days, buses were 15 horsepower. For those people who do go out to the Isle of Rasay, you need to make sure that you've got full tanks, because there's no garage out there. Even though there's only 6 or 7 miles of road, there's just one hotel and a single shop. No salmon cages here in Loch Sligerhead, although in years gone by they were ago nevertheless. It means that the Cuillins are the youngest volcanic mountain range anywhere in Europe, with the exception of Iceland, where they're still growing. 1,000 people staying in Portree, 12,000 guests, along with the 3,000 residents. The deepest part of the bay is actually the central part of the bay, and it's deep enough to go in that part of the bay to take ocean-going liners. And there are a dozen of the original jail and sheriff's court is actually up here on the right. 50 yards up the road there you can see that big white building next to the church. In its last incarnation, that building was actually the Tourist Information Centre. So we can say it's been in continuous use for 350. The big green tanks there are oil tanks, incidentally. Most of the supply of petrol and heating oil originally built by Lord MacDonald and given to his wife as a present. It was actually built as a shooting lodge, but I suppose once they hunted and shot everything, taken down in a 2-metre pipe 300 feet down to the seashore where there's a turbine shed. When it was built 1952, this hydroelectric power station generated all the power requirement for the island. Nowadays on this peninsula, and in places that ridge goes.
Oh, did you? Oh, okay. What's the main name? Oh, okay.
We went down to New South Wales.
Interesting that they do the submarine testing, isn't it?
Because there's no money to be made in tenant farming and crofting, that's why the young people, places like Staffin here, are actually leaving, because they're not interested in this system. Is called the run rig system, and you can see which of these strips are in use and you can see which are not. All of this volcanic lava layers lies on a layer of clay. This layer of clay is acting like a lubricant. And they're doing this to prevent the soil on these steep slopes actually sliding down onto the road and cutting a shrouded in the mist on the left hand side. And the road sort of meanders through them. Just down on the right hand side there, nestling in the trees, you can see a little hotel, the Floddigary Hotel. And 2 or 3 years ago that hotel was for sale. It's £1 million. When the deal was finally done, 70% of that money had to be paid. Just down here on the left, I'm going to ask Paul to slow down in about 200 yards time. We'll look to see the remains. Between the 13th and the 18th century, and who are still very important on the island even today. These are the MacLeods and the MacDonalds. Now, the town of the island here, built by the MacLeods or the MacDonalds, it's always built next to the sea. And this remains or ruins of one over the top of Tulm Bay here on the right is one such castle, built by the MacDonalds in the late part of the 15th century. And it looks out towards the Isles of Harris and Lewis, across a stretch of water we call the Minch. Now, although it was blown down by a gale in 17, peace between the two, I'm going to tell you the story of one such period now. Roof, leaving behind it a lot of soot, hence black houses. That's how black houses got their name, from all the soot inside. No electricity, of course. Your light would have been whale oil lamps. Sorry, we've struck out with the Highland cows. They would have been round the feeder on the left if they were going to be. So that you understand how Flora MacDonald and Bonnie Prince Charlie sit in that history. Following the death of Elizabeth I, the last Tudor monarch, because she was the Virgin Queen, obviously there was nobody to sit on the throne after her. So England had to look around for a new monarch, and eventually it settled on the King of Scotland, who was James VI of Scotland, and he became James I of England. But the Stuarts, which was the family name of those kings, were very poor kings indeed. One was so bad, in fact, we had to cut his head off. Now, all those of you with a nervous disposition were not told that that little bit of road we've just travelled down is actually bolted to the cliff. 4 years ago it all came crashing down on this little bit of road here. A wise decision you just made. A much better decision than that blouse you're wearing anyway. Girl became 16 in order to try to court her. By this time Major Fraser was 56 and the girl was 16. It was to be a marriage made in heaven. By the tower that she married someone else. Major Fraser, he died a bachelor, and the locals, they had the last laugh. When he gets to the top, waiting there for him is a man with clipping tool, and every year he clips a piece out of the ticket in a different shape. When the runner gets there, it's for them to soar on. Be pretty bad, and eventually
Hey, come on.
was too expensive. Well, the Highlands and Islands Development Committee, they got rid of that problem by paying off the outstanding money just last year. So the toll has disappeared. Lovely views as we cross the bridge. That's the Kyle of Lochness, just below us there. Kyle is straighter a sound. And the small town just ahead of us on the mainland is called the Kyle of Lochness. And a number of small communities ahead of us, small Highland communities. Highland Hotel, I say typical, well they're all much the same actually. The hotels in the Highlands were promised help from Spain. The Spanish help duly arrived. And as the Spanish force made its way north along the west coast of Scotland, they were caught in a storm, blown off course. The little island, Ireland Castle, it means the Island Castle. And the countryside that we're in, probably heard on Skye this morning, well, Flora MacDonald, she was the young lady who was so instrumental in helping the fugitive prince, Bonnie Prince Charlie, to escape after his defeat at the Battle of Culloden back in 1746. Flora MacDonald. And indeed, as Dr. Samuel Johnston said of her, he said of her that her name will be mentioned in history, and if courage and fidelity be virtues, mentioned with honor.
Caledonian Canal was designed by a young Scottish engineer, Thomas Telford, and built between about 1822 and 1882. It was built really in those days to help the fishermen of Scotland. If we take old West Coast fishermen as the example, well, to get around to the rich fishing grounds of the East Coast, they scooped out the looser rock and soil. There we have Lochness to our right. Yes, as they retreated to their present positions, they would have scooped out the looser rock and soil, making deposits along the way, releasing enormous quantities of water. The locks were full. Some of these, we believe, are monsters, might well have been trapped in the lock. And they are all of similar latitude. The three things they share in common. They're all of similar latitude. Well, of course, hardly a day of the year goes by without experts from somewhere or other. Many of the American scientists came this way, and they decided that the monster was male. And what he needed to encourage him to make an appearance, this is actually a true story, believe it or not, they put together their rubber version of a female monster. They must have come from California. Yeah, they put together their rubber. So, just trying to find a break here to go slowly by for you. I just passed the end of those vehicles ahead. Looking slightly back over your left shoulders and down below from come out here. There we have it.
There's a couple still. There's a couple that was in there too.
Rebellion, 1745, and that was a much more formidable affair. The 1745 Jacobite Rebellion was led by Prince Charles, the far side of the loch. Brief glimpse. Blair Castle, 19th century, privately owned. Once upon a time it was lived in by the drummer with a group you might have heard of, Jethro Tull. Yes, Bonnie Prince Charlie, army rising might well have been a success. The very sight of the kilted Highlanders marching south with their claymores, struck terror into the people of London, so much so that a rush was made on the Bank of England, which paid out in coins of just 6p to gain time. The Royal Hanoverian yacht was laden with treasure and ready to set sail in the river. But on reaching Derby, it was decided that as hardly any English Jacobites had joined them on their march south. And they did have some supporters in England, but they decided not to get involved on this occasion. Yes, hardly any English Jacobites had joined them on their march south. That they should turn around, march back to Scotland, and fight it out on home territory. Left to us back in the 19th century, just down below. While all that sadness was taking place up here in the Highlands, not that they were not allowed to play the King's new one thing. You never know. You never know. They weren't even allowed to play the bagpipes. Or wear the kilt. Now with the arrival of King George, there were offices for a large area of the Highlands. Actually, an area of the Highlands greater in size than all of Belgium. Oh, that didn't go down well. They tell you what, won't you? Just down below us there. Here's the castle, down to Ireland. And, an hour will take us down to Grantown on the Spey. And you can see the white building ahead, over there to our right, just behind it to the right. That's the old Crofter's Cottage, the monks' cottage.
I mean, just this whole field. Maybe. I think they're pretty well guessing because it doesn't sound like. Because there's all sort of
See, they said inside
mark
there,
and things
some of
over it.
where you walk in there, there's plaques dedicated.
The town centre, just ahead of us here, and just ahead on the right, the Grantown Hotel.
That was cute.
Thanks, mainly I want to find. Corners.
There it is. Wow. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, I see it.
Oh, this is ours.
There's a big and a small dog.
I know.
Yeah, look, see,
Stand off on like this side now and hop on and it's hard as a rock.
I don't think I can take it.
Well, let's all try it.
Get about 10 of them on there.
Wait, I can take that over.
I'll sit here. Oh, all girls now. This is good enough.
Hairs goes like this.
He's getting warm now.
Oh, doesn't he look stern?
Queen Victoria.
Prince Albert. Prince Albert. Prince Albert.
It's meant to be King Freddie.
Another camera. Go.
So you just follow back to that parking area, and from there we'll take you on to the hotel. So as soon as it's over, just follow down. And it's situated, well, what we would call midtown. It's not city centre, it's not on the outskirts, it's in between, midtown, which actually is by far and away the best place to be, away from the city centre at this time of year. Difficult to get a night's sleep. So much happening, so much noise. He decided that he ought to have a fortified building as well, a castle. And he became the first Duke. So arriving there, starting off with our tour of the castle. I will introduce you to your guide, and then you'll have a little time. You'll find, you know, as you finish your visit, there's a souvenir shop there. There are restrooms there to Blair Castle. from the parking area just ahead there behind the trees on the right. There they are. They're obviously full, they're content. It's actually a hotel. It was built as a hotel. Back in the 19th century, it's called the Blair Castle Hotel. But you'll find that French influence in the architectural style of many buildings here in Scotland. You'll notice it, well, you would have noticed it already in Glasgow and indeed up in the Highlands, and you'll notice it around here, you'll notice it in Edinburgh, perhaps some of the major hotels or big department stores. You look at them and were filmed, well, actually down where you headed down towards in Ireland. And the River Tay just there to our left, the River Tay. Others such as, well, Steven Spielberg, Saving Private Ryan. Have you seen that one?
Yeah.
Well, the first 20 minutes, half an hour, on Hull Beach. That was actually filmed in County Wexford in Ireland, and many, many others. Built with commanding views of the surrounding countryside. And that's the reason that centuries ago a castle siege could last not only days, weeks, months, could even go on for years. Quite often, the only way of Tay, the docks area. And indeed down there to our left and off to our right there, and further down to the right, you're down at Rail Bridge. We're now heading for, in bygone days, as the coach and horses passed over the bridge, any pedestrians on the bridge could step back out of the way. And you can, here at St Andrews, you can hire a club and a ball and go on the putting green, have your photograph taken. It looks as if you're actually on the course itself. There to our left. And that is the old course, just off to our left. A part of it. The buildings ahead to our right forming part of the University of... the things just there to our left, they do them. And indeed, the buildings ahead to our right forming part of the University of... the things just there to our left, they do them. I say things clubs. And slow, Capas. Back over your right shoulders there. And the Scores Hotel. Nice coffee shop to the front where you can look out over the, well, the North Sea. And indeed, the bar where you see the telephone booth. And we're just going to squeeze in here on the right, let you out. Okay, we'll be leaving from somewhere along here, just along here, at 2:30. Leaving at 2:30. Road Bridge. Designed by Sir Giles Gilbert Scott. and opened by Her Majesty the Queen. This bridge, the tall, supporting towers ahead of us, rise 512 feet above water. And looking back, naval base, looking over to our left, the old rail bridge.
Coming in over there on the left.
Some maintenance.
Yeah. I just want to get that little.